Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Robert Allman is the Group Senior Vice President for Customer Experience at Dimension Data. Based in Johannesburg, South Africa, Dimension Data operates all over the world, managing and consulting on technology, and they've got a strong focus on CX and customer analytics. Each year for the past 22 years, Dimension Data has published their annual global CX benchmarking report. And this is one of those reports that everybody in the industry looks out for because it's got such a long history and has really deep insights into what companies are really doing about their CX strategy. I called Rob to talk about some of the findings in the 2019 research from Dimension Data. Okay, so let's go straight to the interview. In the present CX environment, how important is it to have a really solid understanding of your customer data, and how can brands get the most from the data that they've already got on their customer behavior?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing in terms of the current environment, we're seeing more transformation take place over the last couple of years with two mega trends that have emerged. Which have predominantly been around digital transformation. And I think more recently, we've seen really significant interest, growth, and prioritizations of robotics and AI and the machine learning, et cetera, attached to that. So within the global CX benchmarking report that we've produced, we really see from the 22 years that we've been doing this research, how we can support organizations in terms of understanding trends, providing insights, and giving them a view of best practice. And that was really the inception of the report 22 years ago, and it's never been more relevant now. And when we look at that, a few kind of indicators around that, where 89% of organizations are saying that CX is the key differentiator for them. Only 10.3% are very satisfied with their CX capability, and another 2/3 are fairly satisfied, which doesn't really talk to the desires around advocacy and customer retention and loyalty. So really we're seeing there's a huge level of room for improvement, focus and intent and attention, that certainly can be underpinned by lots of the enabling technologies and the trends that I've just described. So in terms of the report, we've very much seen, general objective CX strategies that are still very relevant. But generally speaking, we're seeing customers and clients really looking to use CX to build trust, align their service to brand, grow the business, which we're seeing a lot of the more successful leaders attach that growth objective. Customer loyalty and retention comes out as the key element, and that's been consistent. Differentiation versus in highly competitive and changing markets is critical. Improving efficiency and productivity has to be up there, and people are often looking for dual returns of improving customer experience, reducing effort, increasing advocacy, but also underpinning change in terms of productivity levels. And then really, when they're doing all of these things, they're looking to reduce costs, grow revenues, improve the customer experiences, and really transform their organization in terms of their digital capability, being more driven by data as an organization. So really, when we look at this, some of the reason people are benchmarking is they're looking to validate their strategy, they're looking to justify business cases, and they're really looking to understand what good looks like and the kind of things that they should be prioritizing in the CX space in a time of big change and transformation. So really, we look at that, and we're seeing that as a consistent. The report that we've run, which we'll talk about some of the findings in this session, has been going for 22 years. think when we look, that's underpinned by the view that we've got from kind of key analysts, etc., who consume this report and very much use it as the basis for their planning and thought process in the whole CX arena.
Mm-hmm. I thought I was looking at the report and I thought it was interesting that there's only 12% of brands that say that they are fully digitally optimized. And so if we're looking at that minority that say they are digitally optimized, what do they look like? What have they done? What have they done to optimize the customer journey? Like who's doing this really well?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and when we look at the report, we're seeing that the gap between leaders and laggards continues to grow. When we look at 18 and 17, and I actually expect that to widen. We've just released the survey for the 2020 report. And the key things that we're seeing really is that there's top quartile performance levels are indicating huge opportunity, really for showing massive levels of productivity and growth, and this really gives huge opportunity for many other organisations to start performing. And when I break that down in terms of that statement, if we consider the elements like first contact resolution is still ranked as number one as a performance measure. Those have got optimized customer journeys that appear in the upper quartile. They're 16% more effective than others on things like telephone. And then when we move to the assisted services, they're 24% more effective, and that even grows even further when they look at automated channels, and they're saying that they're 38% more effective than other entities. So when we look at those raw performance stats and across different channels from traditional to assisted to self, there's really clear difference, and this translates into customer satisfaction, NPS, and really interestingly, quality scores as well. So when we look at those top quartile companies and how they outperform the average benchmarks, it's 85% to just under, 57% for customer satisfaction, 54% better on NPS, 90 to 54% on NPS. And then in and around the quality performance, excuse me, Mark, I've got that slightly wrong. They're outperforming on NPS by 85%, and then when it comes to quality, it's 90% versus 73.8%. So we're seeing some really kind of tangible differences in terms of performance of top quartile. And then when you look at things like absenteeism levels, we're getting just a third of the absenteeism levels in those higher performing entities. Those higher performing entities are providing twice as much as the rest. And when we look at things like average handle time, etc., metrics that aren't universally talked about now, but when we look at productivity and how that's relevant to organizations that are saying that they are optimized, they're 10 times lower. And when we look at resolution, this is the huge focus in terms of these type of organization. And so really, when we look at some of the characteristics in terms of what good looks like for them, they're making and getting their customers to understand the availability of functionality that's more digitally orientated. They've got a joined up way of communicating that, migrating, encouraging adoption. Hand in hand with that, they've got highly effective UX that they've considered and thought about from an outside-in approach. And really the design is put together to meet customer needs, understanding that will make things easier. There'll be a closed loop process in terms of things like automation, and they're replacing a perceived desire / need for human interaction by actually looking and understanding, how they can design something better, rather than thinking about it with a cap of how do we reduce costs, how do we avoid calls. And so there's some of the typical behaviors and performance things of organizations that are saying that they're optimized. The confidentiality and privacy prevents me giving some of the names there, but hopefully that gives a clear picture of what we're seeing in terms of the leaders and how they've set their stall out in this space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And I know that you've also predicted that around 2/3 of all the companies that have responded to your survey will be using robotic process automation in the near future. But this is interesting, that so many are saying they're about to start using automation, but it seems that so many companies have got a problem balancing human and digital customer support. Surely there's some tasks that they're always going to work better with a human. So how are the companies you're talking to planning which processes can possibly be automated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key, there's a number of kind of key words that I think of when we're interacting with customers and clients, and when we see some of the approaches. I think there's a mature approach that may have been built up through trial and error, and there's an inquisitive approach, but it's certainly a widespread element that is pretty much on every conversation or agenda that we meet and discuss with clients, or that we're seeing come through with the survey. And this year's survey really drills down and unpacks these things in more detail, because we recognise that this area is so salient. I think there's a few elements that play into this. Firstly, I think that what people are becoming a little more comfortable with is that they've been very concerned, which is good to see, about the level of risk. And where organisations think about risk, there's a few elements that are self-explanatory. So how do you apply this in the ever-increasing world of compliance, regulation, etc., and what does that mean? And these are industry challenges. We've had clients where it's difficult to move from proof of concept to production, because where the robotic automation takes place, within and outside of people's firewalls or different security domains for them, how do you ensure that a bot is cleared for things like anti-money laundering, other relevant security checks and processes that we run on humans. And although some of these things may sound immediately obvious, they're things that have been identified that we need to resolve as enablers to fast track and move from proof of concept through to driving things into production. Likewise, I think it's really, really important, and we've learned this lesson with varying different technologies over the years, whether it was stretching things like open speech too far, etc., around the mid-2000s. People are concerned that whatever they do shouldn't sacrifice the impact on customer experience. And we've seen data in the report saying that fundamentally, good efforts burn if customer experience is depreciated. And really, I think people are concerned about the competence and capabilities of the technology, and making sure that they manage that risk in terms of productivity and experience. And the two, once again, will work hand in hand, because as we all know, with self-service, people tend to vote with their behaviours. And if it invokes frustration or breakdown in process, or just isn't fit for purpose, we don't use it. or we go elsewhere. So I think there's that risk and challenge in terms of compliance, regulation, and appropriateness. But I think there's also then the cultural approach, and I think this certainly relates to my last comments of leaders versus laggards. There's an acceptance by leaders that this is a very serious, fundamental part of organizational change and transformation. That the actual change elements are considered extremely seriously, and the transformation element is seen that this is something that is here. We're in a time now where we've seen more change at a pace that we've never seen before, and we expect that pace. This is probably the slowest period of change in terms of technology, as raw computing speed accelerates, and which will give the backbone to make these automation elements more and more effective. So really within that, we have seen some inhibitors which will reduce. We're also seeing people understand things that they want to automate fully, that are automated appropriately, that offer value and is simple, easy, convenient for their customers to use, versus how do we employ things that are more appropriate to support the human interaction or the assisted service elements. And that can be things like agent assist and bringing knowledge bases to life and really transforming the knowledge that's available, which is critical as the scope has widened in the CX space. And really, supporting agents in terms of, how they support things or how they trigger system activity where traditionally they've been traversing multiple systems, they've had to be process experts, etc. A lot of that can be resolved through the use of things like robotic process automation. And really that has huge benefits from a people perspective in terms of, reducing the time to competence in terms of training, allowing people to be really focused on the customer, the conversation, the issue, the opportunity. And, that's organizations who understand that are typically growth orientated, are thinking about the use of AI in terms of how they become more proactive. Organizations that are saying, look, we've heard about this, we've seen this, let's introduce a few kind of quick wins, see if it works or not. That hasn't led to, deep-rooted expertise. We're also seeing organizations looking at how they can reskill their staff in terms of becoming experts and utilizing their process, system, understanding of the customer to utilize this in terms of how we can translate that to better use of appropriate automation and appropriate use of things like artificial intelligence, etc.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because I know that in your data there was a lot of mentions of artificial intelligence, and are you seeing that your clients are they using it to replace tasks that are undertaken by humans, or is it more about augmenting what the humans can actually do? So and are we sure about the boundaries of where we're using AI at present?
Yeah, I think we obviously seeing when we look at the data within the report, a third believe that 11 to 25% of agent-led CX duties will become automated above and beyond what we're doing today. The overall average there was just under 10%. So people certainly, when you marry that to productivity gains at that level in relatively mature industries in CX practice, that's really material gains that the people are looking to make there. I certainly believe, and once again, where I'm kind of firmly of the view that when we look at some of the questions that we've included in this year's report, we're really trying to unpack a whole number of areas. I think largely people could label it as ethics in AI and how we apply that to CX, etc. There's a number of areas within that I think of. There's areas such as data use, privacy, etc. that we've seen come in with things like GDPR, which is policy that's been imposed. But what really we need to think about is how organizations devise their policies, because if we have an approach of simply automating things that we believe we should automate or possible to automate without clear strategy, policy guidelines, then there can be real issues. And customers are going to look to work with organizations that they can trust, that are appropriate, and that blend in well, and they want to be able to contact someone very, very easily, not have to search around for hours on a website to speak to a human. And I'd really categorize that in two things, where they want to resolve complexity, which they haven't been able to resolve in an automated world. They want reassurance over things and comfort over things that they may view are disturbing, emotional, etc. Or they will want engagement over higher value activity. Although it may be possible to automate a mortgage, etc., there's a point that they may feel comfortable to confirm things and want to be cared about and talk to someone or see someone. And so it's how we connect these things and judge these things, I think, are really, really important. There is opportunity to replace a number of the simple areas from an engagement perspective, and there's a great opportunity to automate areas in terms of the complexity, in terms of tasks and systems, which may be high complexity in terms of systems, but low value add in terms of the customer. So I think organizations certainly need to consider these things. They need to understand what their policy is. We don't want to get to a point where essentially people have weaponized CX. It's something that, is around trust, ease, loyalty, proactively, increasingly, being able to target through propensity and needs rather than, system being able to drive things. And that control, understanding and policy needs to be done, needs to be invested in. And it's never going to be fully catered for in terms of regulation or government policy, because the world's moving so rapidly. So once again, I think we'll see the leaders build this into their optimized strategies, and organizations that aren't organized have a clear view where this fits in, what they want to do, where they're going. They'll find themselves, moving from pillar to post on this, and that's something that, could be expensive and ultimately frustrating for their customers.
And do you think that the brands the companies that you've been talking to, do you think that are they managing to keep up with the demands of these digital customers then?
Yes, I think it's certainly very mixed, and we're seeing. I don't think there's an industry now that we haven't seen disrupted by new players, and they've come in. They may not have had the customer base of traditional organizations, but they've been able to adopt a blue sky thinking approach, greenfields in terms of systems and organizational structures. And really, when they've looked at that, they've designed, as I said earlier, outside in with their customer experience. They've been able to design their processes really with a perspective of data-driven, self-data driven in terms of processing, etc., where the customer drives dictates a lot of these elements. And so, you know, they've definitely defined the new normal or what best practice looks like. And most importantly, within the market, they've defined what customers expect. And so this area isn't something as a technology that's you know, looking for a problem. It's very much ingrained in terms of how we use and do things, etc. And really, you know, those organizations have set the benchmark in terms of, you know, from large multinationals through to, you know, smaller enterprises and other brands. It's being baked into the thinking. Different people have different maturities in terms of their exposure, their capability, but certainly the way that a lot of the technologies are delivered, you know, the exposure of things like natural language processing, understanding, etc., you know, and how those are core elements of, you know, massive cloud providers or hyperscalers now. That's really democratized the whole access to these technologies. The differentiation will be in how people apply them, how they can come up with that strategy, how they think about how things are joined together, the breakdown of silos or the bridging of silos, and really that joined up handwriting, thinking, action will really be reflective in the final valuable product that customers experience, the value that it provides, the ease, and really, you know, with the automation, etc. We hear people talking about delighting customers. Customers want things to be easy. They rarely want to engage unless things have become frustrating, or they're seeking kind of opinion on value. So we really need to understand that, you know, this digitally and data and automated primed worlds of contact, it's really critical to get the strategy right. And going back to an earlier point, we really believe that the balance of harmonization of how you think about people, primarily obviously the customer, how the people and the value elements that they can play in CX, which is still massively preferential, over 50% preferred to things like automated channels, how we think about the role of robots and chat and all those things in the blend of engagement, how we become masters of ingesting, nurturing, and managing data is critical. And all of these things are balanced, and they have to be used appropriately. They have to be used at the appropriate value point. And as I said, the key word for me is harmonization, because if we don't get that harmonization right, then a lot of the efforts and investments, you know, will backfire or not be used. And the communication of that capability is so very important, because we're seeing 50%, you know, over 50% of organizations are saying one of the principal failures of their digital initiatives is unawareness and lack of awareness, both externally and internally. So, you know, if we've got something, let's communicate it. Let's look at how it's used. Let's manage it. You know, we're seeing a lot of automation instances put in, and they're regarded as a successful project that then becomes unsuccessful because people take a set and forget approach to it. But the reality that we're seeing is that things need to be managed. Bots have a life cycle and a lifetime, and we need to think about that. We need to manage and have bots that understand how well things are performing and to what quality levels. So we really need to apply a lot of the practices that the contact center industry has adopted and become masters of to a far more integrated approach in terms of, you know, the digital customer experience and how that integrates with, you know, the people, the processes, and the data, and how we manage that moving forward.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I am at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.